Hello students, now we are on a next chapter in general anatomy, that is the muscles. I will just cover the muscles in next 4 lectures. Today is the first lecture on the muscle, and in this I will just cover the skeletal muscle description, okay, the general aspect of the skeletal muscles, and then I will also tell you the synovial sheath and the bursa which are seen in relation to the skeletal muscles. Okay, so we go now to the next slide. Now, muscles have unique ability to contract. What does it mean? It means that the muscle fibers or muscle cell, okay, as in case of the smooth muscle cell, and fiber in case of the skeletal muscle fiber or the muscle fiber of the cardiac muscle, they are having a unique ability to contract. That means this property of the contractibility is well developed in this muscle tissue only. Okay, now say for example the capability or the ability of the conduction of impulse was is developed fully in the nerve tissue. The muscle tissue shows the ability to contract. They can contract, okay, when they are stimulated. Okay, so contraction in muscle occurs due to their ability to convert the chemical energy in mechanical energy. Does this mean? That means whatsoever chemical energy is there in the form of the actin and myosin filament, okay, within the muscle fibers, okay, when they contract, they convert this chemical energy into the mechanical energy, because the bones are then moved. When a muscle contract, especially the skeletal muscle contract, then it moves at a joint. Okay, that means the bone moves at a joint, and this is a mechanical energy. So the chemical energy is converted into the mechanical energy. Similarly, for the other muscle beside this skeletal muscle, the smooth muscle contraction will lead to the, okay, contraction of a blood vessel, for example, into the smooth muscle, leads to the propulsion of the blood. And similarly in the GIT, okay, the food contents are propelled forward. Okay, then in case of the heart muscle or cardiac muscle, it pumps the blood. Okay, it pumps the blood which circulate in the arteries. Now the contraction of the skeletal muscle are responsible for the production of movements in body. When I was teaching you the skeletal topic on general anatomy on the bones, I have told you that the bones along with the muscle, they form an important system of our body, what is called as the skeletal-muscular system or musculoskeletal system, okay, which is a locomotory system. Okay, that means the contraction of muscle moves the bones at a joint, and this helps the various movement, for example the sitting, running, jumping, walking, or and working with your hands. Okay, now there are three types of the muscles. Okay, you have already must be knowing that our body consists of three types of muscle, out of which skeletal muscles are most abundant. Okay, and the other two muscles are the cardiac and the smooth muscle. The skeletal muscles are also known as the striated muscle. Why they are called as the striated muscle? They are called as the striated muscle because when you see a muscle fiber of a skeletal muscle under microscope, there will be the constant dark and light bands will be seen. That means it will appear as if the muscle fiber is striated. Okay, so the dark and light bands are seen, right? Then this muscle, skeletal muscle, is also called as the voluntary muscle. Okay, because this act as per your will. That means the contraction of the skeletal muscle is under your control. And why it is under your control? The reason is that these muscles are supplied by the somatic nerves. Somatic nerve means those nerves which take origin from the brain in the form of the cranial nerves. The 12 pairs of cranial nerves are there, and these uh, nerves, they also take origin from spinal cord. 31 pairs of the spinal nerves, they ultimately go and supply to the skeletal muscle. They innervate the skeletal muscle, and that is the reason these I mean to say the skeletal muscles are under our voluntary control because they are supplied by the craniospinal nerves. Then, if you see the cardiac muscle, it is also known as the striated muscle. Okay, and this is because again here under the microscope, these fibers of cardiac muscle, they show the striation. This muscle is involuntary. That means you cannot order, okay, or as per your will, the cardiac muscle fibers will not contract or relax because this muscle fibers, cardiac muscle fibers, they are supplied by the autonomic nervous system, that is sympathetic and parasympathetic, which is adjusting the contraction and relaxation of the heart muscle of its own. Whenever more oxygen and blood is needed, heart start pumping more. Okay, that means the rate of the heart contraction, okay, it increases, and then it may slow also. Okay, that is totally under the control of the autonomic nerves, so that's why it is called as involuntary. Similarly, the smooth muscle, okay, and smooth muscle is found in the viscera. Okay, let's say for example in GIT, uterus, fallopian tube, okay, various ducts of our body, okay, ureter, many places you get this smooth muscle, including the tunica media of the blood vessels. Okay, so these are smooth muscle, and they are called smooth because if it is seen under the microscope, the fibers are spindle shape, small, and they don't show any striations. So that's why it is called as non-striated smooth muscle fibers. Okay, so this muscle is smooth. They are involuntary again. Okay, so the smooth muscle contraction is not as per your will. Okay, because it is again the nerves which supply this smooth muscle are autonomic nerves. Okay, they are sympathetic or parasympathetic nerves. Okay, and so this is just an introduction of the different kind of the muscles which are found in our body. I am moving to the next slide. Now, now we will concentrate only on to the skeletal muscle. So whatsoever slides now will follow, and the next lectures which will follow, they will be dealing only with the skeletal muscle. Okay, we will learn about the smooth and cardiac muscle now in the histology classes only. Okay, now in general anatomy, if we see about this I will say description of the skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscles are called skeletal because they are attached to the bones. Okay, so that's why they are called as the skeletal muscle. But some skeletal muscles, okay, they are also attached onto the viscera. At least one end of that is attached to the viscera. For example, there are muscles which are called as extraocular muscle, which lie outside the eyeball, and these muscles are attached at their one end or distal end to the sclera of the eyeball. So that means they move the eyeball. Okay, so they may attach onto the viscera. Then some of the muscles, skeletal muscles, they also gain their attachment on directly onto the skin after taking origin from the bones. For example, the muscle of the face. So we can make many, I would say, face impression of the face, or the facial muscle is responsible for showing the various movement of the face. You can smile, you can show your anger with your face, you can just show your dissatisfaction from your face, and this all emotions of the face of the person, not only face of the persons, are reflected onto the skin because of the contraction of the skeletal muscle, which are directly gaining their insertion onto the under surface of the skin of face. Okay, similarly the muscle, I mean say, which are present in the tongue, okay, they are also gaining their attachment or insertion onto the mucous membrane of the tongue. Okay, now these skeletal muscles, they, as I said, they are quite abundant in our body. Okay, lot of skeletal muscles are present on our limbs, upper limb, lower limb, and then in the trunk also, and they constitute up to 40 to 50% of body weight. That means it is uh, uh, half of the body is made up of the skeletal muscle. Okay, a muscle, if you will see the skeletal muscle, a muscle is a having exhibit two parts. Okay, see this is an just a cross section from the belly of the skeletal muscle, but a skeletal muscle will exhibit always two parts. Okay, a belly and tendon. Okay, this is the muscle belly, and then this rope like structure, narrow structure, which is taking origin from this belly, is called a tendon. So in a skeletal muscle, usually there are two parts, muscle belly and the tendon. We will learn more about the belly and tendon, so don't get impatient. Okay, there are thousands of muscle fibers. See, this belly was cut transversely, and you can see these dots. These dots indicate a single muscle fibers. So there may be thousands of muscle fiber, or at least there are some muscles which may have hundreds of the muscle fibers. Okay, within the belly, and this muscle belly is surrounded by the connective tissue C. Now we will learn more about the muscle belly and tendon. Now the belly and tendon, if we'll see further, see here in this diagram, this is the muscle belly. Okay, the red color structure is muscle fibers, skeletal muscle fibers, and they constitute what is called as the muscle belly. And then from this muscle belly, on the other end, there is the beginning of the tendon. Okay, tendon. Now tendon is the cord like, rope like structure, rounded almost, okay, mostly, and it is non-contractile part, while the belly is a contractile part. That means whatsoever contraction in our muscle takes place due to the stimulation of this muscle, when the nerve fibers bring the impulse, these muscle fibers, they contract, the whole belly contracts. Okay, so that belly part is only the contractile, while tendon part is made up of the collagen fibers. They are connective tissue fibers, and they are non-contractile. They will not show any contraction. Okay, because they are also inelastic, so no lengthening of the tendon can take place because they are inelastic. So just understand that it is the belly of the muscle which is only contractile, tendon is inelastic and non-contractile part of a muscle. Okay, muscle. A muscle can also, a muscle usually exhibit two ends. Okay, mostly it exhibit two ends. The upper end, that is called as the proximal end, which is more towards the root of the limb, and then there is another end which is called as the distal end. Okay, so there is a proximal end and then there is a distal end. Now these ends are also sometimes called as, the proximal end is also called as the origin of a skeletal muscle, while distal end is also sometimes known as the insertion of a muscle on a bone. Okay, but these days, okay, mostly the origin and insertion terms are not referred. Okay, this, most of the books will usually refer it as proximal and distal attachment of a skeletal muscle on bones, okay, on bones, right? So this is the origin is called as proximal attachment, and the distal attachment is called as insertion, though you should remember both the terms. But uh, and the reason is that sometimes this distal attachment insertion may be muscular, okay, and it may act from the distal end towards the proximal end, and that is the reversal of the function takes place. That is the reason why now we use mostly the proximal and distal end of a muscle. Now, as a rule, a muscle crosses at least one joint, okay, between its two ends, means between proximal and distal end. It is a rule that a skeletal muscle will cross one joint. Why this rule is there and why it crosses one joint? At least it may cross multiple joints, 2, 3, 4, 5 joints. It may, for example, a muscle taking origin from forearm will its tendon will pass in front of the wrist, then it will pass in front of the palm, and then it pass in front of the, I mean saying through the finger, it will go to the terminal phalanx. Okay, so it is crossing many joint, but the rule is that it has to cross at least one joint. And why it crosses a joint, a muscle? The reason is that muscle is a contractile structure, and when it will contract through the tendon, it will pull the distal bone on which it is attached, and this distal bone then will move at a joint. Say for example, here is a joint. Let me put the, I'm to say the pointer. See, this is a joint, and this is the proximal end, and this is the distal end. When this muscle belly will contract, then it will, through its tendon, it will pull this distal bone, and distal bone will be lifted up here in this case, and thus a movement will take place at a joint. And if this muscle is not crossing to any joint, then there is no use of having a muscle, okay, because the skeletal muscle is for the movements of the bones at a joint, okay. Now this muscle, uh, the junction of the muscle, okay, where the belly is ending, the tendon is starting, okay. At the junction of the muscle and tendon, as it is seen in this diagram, you can see this junction is called as myotendinous junction. This is called as myotendinous junction. And the individual muscle fiber here, the skeletal muscle fiber, and then the group of the muscle fiber is covered by the connective tissue, where again the collagen fiber is predominantly present. These collagen fibers, which are covering to the muscle fibers and the bundle of muscle fibers, they continue in the tendon. They continue in the tendon. So the myotendinous junction is nothing but the continuation of the collagen fibers which were there present into the muscle belly. They are now continuing into the tendon itself. Okay. Now move to the next slide here. And again, the further structure of this muscle, you can say that each muscle fibers, I mean say belly, it contains thousands of muscle fiber, which I have already shown. You can see in the cross section of the belly, there are hundreds of fibers are at least seen. And these fibers, they are arranged into different pattern, okay? They are arranged into. Okay, and why they are arranged in a pattern, which I am going to tell you. Okay, first let me tell you the pattern. Now, individual muscle fiber, see this lower diagram here. Individual skeletal muscle fiber is covered by delicate connective tissue, and this delicate connective tissue, which is covering to individual muscle fiber, is called as endomysium. Endomysium. And then hundreds of the muscle fibers are then covered by a layer of connective tissue fibers, okay, a layer of, and this group of the muscle fiber which is covered by this layer of the muscle connective tissue fiber, it is called as perimysium. This is called as perimysium. So after endomysium, it is perimysium, and then the whole of the muscle belly is finally covered by and another layer of connective tissue, and that is called as epimysium. So there are the three levels of the connective tissue covering in a belly, eh, that is the epimysium, perimysium, and endomysium, from outside to the inside, okay, inside. And then there is a special feature of this connective tissue and these fibers, that these are connect, I mean say, provide an space through which the blood vessel will pass in the perimysium, in the connective tissue septa, which is formed by the perimysium. Blood vessels and nerves, they travel, okay, they travel, okay. Now, this is the structure of the belly of the skeletal muscle fibers, right? Let's move to the next slide. Now, after this belly of the completion of the general feature or general anatomy of the skeletal muscle belly, we come to the skeletal muscle tendon. Okay. Now, skeletal muscle tendon, I have told you that it is inelastic in nature. That means it cannot be expanded. Okay. If you try to stretch a tendon, it can't. It is just like a nylon rope. Okay, which you must have seen. Okay, nylon rope, you cannot stretch it like a rubber band. Okay, and this inelastic tendon is attached on its distal end to the bone, and its proximal end it was at the myotendinous junction. Okay, tendons are usually long. Okay. In the diagram, this tendon, if you will see in this diagram, first diagram, this tendon is very small. Okay, but then tendons are also long. I have given you an example that a tendon of forearm can cross, of a forearm muscle can cross many joint and reach up to the tip of the distal phalanx, okay, or the tip of the finger, okay, tip of the fingers, right? So it are usually long, and these tendons, okay, thus they act from the origin side to the attachment side distally, okay, just distally. A tendon has a function. That means when a muscle contract, a long tendon or a short tendon, whatsoever it may be, it will pull the muscle on which it is attached. Okay, on which it will, and it will have some action on the intervening joints to which it is crossing also, not only to the distal, but so many joint which it is crossing, they will also not be unaffected by the contraction of the muscle belly. They will also show some movement. Okay, we will see later. Okay, sometimes these tendons are in the form of the flattened seed. They are not like a rope always. Okay, you can see that this muscle is a flattened muscle. Okay, and this muscle is also showing a flattened aponeurotic seed. So tendon is not like a rope, but it is in the form of a flattened seed, and this is called as aponeurosis. Okay, when I was teaching you the deep fascia in general anatomy, I told you about the aponeurosis. So this is a kind of the tendon, okay, flattened tendon. Now sometime this tendon, okay, when it crosses the bony ridge, tubercle, or through a special arrangement, pulley or trochlea, it can change its direction. Okay, so it will not go only in the direction of the attachment, but it may change the direction, okay, and then go to get its insertion onto the distal end, okay, its insertion. Now in this diagram you see there is a muscle which moves the eyeball, and this muscle is changing its direction here. See this, the tendon is changing. So when the belly will contract, muscle belly will contract, there will be the change in the direction of the force. Okay, so the muscle belly may be having one direction, but then its contraction will have another direction. Okay, it will have, because the tendon has changed its direction. I will move to the next slide. Now we come to another aspect of the skeletal muscle, and I will tell you about a spatial arrangement to minimize the friction when a tendon is moving against the bone or any surface which is providing the friction. Now we come to thus the synovial sheath around a tendon. In this diagram, you are seeing the arrangement of synovial sheath which is surrounding to that of a tendon, which can be better appreciated, okay, in this transverse section of this upper diagram. You can see that synovial sheath is a mechanism. It is a mechanism which is to reduce the friction. Whenever this tendon will be moving, then okay, if there is a bone here, it will be rubbing to the bone just to minimize this friction between the bone, ligaments, okay, or retinaculum. A joint, I will say a tendon is surrounded by the synovial sheath. Okay, now this synovial sheath content, it is a closed cavity. As you can see this transverse section, it has two layer, a layer which is intimately covering to that of the cross section of tendon, and a layer which is covering outside. Okay, so there is a space between the two layers which are called as a visceral layer and a parietal layer, and there is a synovial fluid. This synovial membrane is just similar to the synovial membrane of the joint, which secretes the lubricating fluid. Okay, now this has two layers. They are enclosed a space which is filled with the lubricating fluid. Thus it minimizes the friction between, I mean to say, when a tendon is moving, okay. Now moving to the next modification of the skeletal muscle, beside this formation of the synovial sheath around a tendon, we will see that there is another modification, what is called as bursa. Now these are also called as synovial bursa. Now it is also a lubricating mechanism, as we have seen in the case of the synovial membrane. Okay, and it also reduces the friction between bone and skin. Now again this bursa, they are also the closed sac lined by the synovial membrane. Okay, just and they are of various size. Okay, they are, but they are not covering to a structure completely as we have seen in the tendon. They are just interposed or placed between the two surface, I will say two structures which are moving and are under the friction. For example, here this is a bursa in diagram. I am say where I am moving my pointer. This is a bursa here which is placed between skin. This diagram is from knee joint. This is the skin of knee, and this is bursa. On other side, it is the patella bone or the bone, kneecap bone. Okay, and usually the skin movements become smooth because this is the subcutaneous bursa is placed between skin and the patella bone. Similarly, this bursa is also placed between skin and the tendon. So thus it will minimize the movements, I mean friction during the movements of the knee joint. Thus a bursa, as I said, is a small closed sac enclosing a capillary space. Though the space shown here in this diagram is much more, but it is a narrow capillary space. Okay. Now this is lined by the synovial membrane and filled with the lubricating fluid. Now the bursa may be either subcutaneous beneath the skin, or it may be also between the two tendons. It may be also between tendons and a fibrous band, or it may be between tendon and a bone. Okay, so this is the subtendinous bursa. Okay, so between the tendon and that of the bone, beneath the tendon. So wherever there is a friction, okay, along the path of the contraction of the muscle or the tendon, the this bursa they develops. Okay, and these are nothing but the mechanism to minimize the friction. So we have learned the two I mean to say modifications, okay, for the skeletal muscle. One was the synovial sheath surrounding to the tendons all around, okay, with a parietal and visceral layer, and here is a bursa, which are the close sake, okay, which are the close sake, right? This completes the today's lecture. Thank you very much.